Iron Man 3 is a very important film for the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel as a company, not only because it's following up the gargantuan success of the Avengers, but it's also the third part in a very well-established franchise. Iron Man 3 picks up after the events of the Avengers, where New York has suffered an alien invasion, the Avengers have come and saved the day. Tony Stark, still played brilliantly by Robert Downey Jr, is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because of what he went through in the Avengers. He's been in the presence of gods, monsters, aliens, and it's made him feel a little bit insignificant and insecure. He's having to deal with that traumatic experience, as well as his own personal demon. The film itself opens in the turn of the new century, which, after a brilliant music cue, and I won't ruin what the song is, but it did make me laugh. I absolutely love the opening of this movie. We see Tony Stark 10 years ago, well, more than 10 years ago, just being his usual self, sleeping around and ignoring what could be quite important scientific and business ventures. His actions in this prologue create the villains for the rest of the movie, which is an interesting take on the character. The villains are essentially created by his own ego. Once we're in present day and we're post-Avengers, there are a number of what appear to be suicide bombings take place, which Tony Stark begins to look into. He is out of the suit quite a lot. Also, we have the Mandarin, played by Ben Kingsley, who is a world-renowned terrorist, basically ruining Tony's day and taking credit for these bombings. This is something that gives the film a very sort of real-world and relatable feel. What they did with the Mandarin and the villains in this movie, I absolutely loved, and I know it gets quite a bit of criticism. I'm a comic book fan and didn't have a problem with it at all, because comic book movies, they're a different medium. They have to adapt and give the audience something different. One thing that probably had Marvel worrying is the fact that Jon Favreau, who directed the first two Iron Man movies, dropped out of Iron Man 3 and needed replacing. Now they turned to Shane Black. This is the guy who wrote The Last Boy Scout, Lethal Weapon, The Long Kiss Goodnight, a load of absolutely brilliant Hollywood movies in the late 80s and early 90s. Apparently he actually did an uncredited script polish on the first Iron Man movie. So he comes on to take the directional reins, and I get the impression that he had quite a bit of creative control over this. And what I absolutely love about this movie is that it's a Shane Black movie that happens to have Iron Man in it. In the same way that Tim Burton's Batman Returns was a Tim Burton movie with Batman, and you have the Christmas setting, which ironically enough wasn't Shane Black's idea, but rather his co-writers, even though most of Shane Black's movies set at Christmas. You also have the well-dressed, wisecracking henchman. You have the quips and one-liners all the way through. You have the big action sequences, the buddy cop dynamic between Tony Stark and War Machine, or now known as the Iron Patriot, as well as Tony Stark and a kid that he meets along the way. So you have all the tropes of the old Shane Black movies, and as a fan of Shane Black, I mean, I grew up watching this guy's movies. I absolutely adored all of that. I know that the Christmas setting rubs some people the wrong way, considering this movie was released in the summer, but this is something that I think gives the movie a very distinct personality and sort of sets it apart from the other Avengers movies. Robert Downey Jr. is on top form, but it's to be expected. This is, I think, the 5th time he's played the character. He absolutely knocks it out of the park. He brings what we expect him to bring to his role as Tony Stark, but he also brings a certain vulnerability in that he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, as any sort of mortal man would following the events of the Avengers. He certainly brings an undercurrent of darkness to it, but it doesn't go too dark. Now, I've heard criticisms, and an argument could be made that they don't go deep enough into the PTSD element of the story, but I think considering that these movies are really designed for kids, the kids' movies are comic book movies, I think they do enough to make it interesting and to develop and deepen his character while still not detracting from the whiz-bang entertainment that you get and what you expect from an Iron Man movie. So I loved what they did with the PTSD stuff, and this led to some terrific interplay between Robert Downey Jr. and also a young boy that he encounters during the film when he's left stranded in the middle of nowhere at one point without his suit. That's another criticism I hear of this movie, that people don't like the fact that he's out of the suit an awful lot. However, I loved that, because essentially we've seen Iron Man 4 times, including his cameo in The Incredible Hulk. If you want Iron Man in the suit, go and watch the other Iron Man movies. This is doing something different. This is not a film about Iron Man, it's a film about Tony Stark. The supporting cast, as always, are brilliant. You have Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, who, while I'm not a massive fan of Gwyneth Paltrow, I do like her in the role of Pepper Potts, who quite literally, you know, saves Tony's arse. And it's established from the first Iron Man movie that, you know, without Pepper Potts, Tony Stark would probably be dead already. You have Jon Favreau, while he's dropped out of directing, he's still playing Happy Hogan in this, and he's given a little bit more to do in this movie, which I quite liked. He also leads to some great comic relief. You've got Don Cheadle, brilliant as always. You've got Guy Pearce as the sort of shady scientist. You have Ben Kingsley as the Mandarin. All brilliant performances. Iron Man 3 deepens and develops the character of Tony Stark. While it carries on the events of the Avengers, it doesn't feel like a slave to those events. It is very much a standalone movie, and I think it's all the better for it. It feels like an 80s and 90s, you know, buddy cop action film because of Shane Black's involvement. I'd like to see Shane Black continue to work with Marvel, because I think, certainly get the impression that Marvel bring out the best in Shane Black. So I absolutely adored this movie. It's very close to being my favourite Avengers film. It's certainly a great springboard for Marvel Phase 2, and here's hoping that Thor: The Dark World and Captain America: The Winter Soldier can continue the quality and success of Iron Man 3.